forever. Hey everyone, how are you doing? Happy New Year. I hope you had a really good holiday season. I hope you got some good books for Christmas and had a lot of good reading time. I didn't want to start the new year without wrapping up December because I had an amazing December, not just for the books I read, which I'm going to talk about, but some amazing events that I went to. So I got to see Michelle Obama, and I know I talked about this before, sort of hopelessly, that I was not going to have a chance because I was 20-something thousand in the queue, but I got a return ticket to see Michelle Obama interviewed by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie at the South Bank Centre in London, and it was such an incredible event. It was, you know, it cost me, it was like 70, 80 pounds or something, but it was so worth it. And it was also like, this is a historic event. I can't miss out on this if I have the opportunity to see this, because this was the first time Michelle ever met Chimamanda, even though they both admired each other so much. And they talked for an hour and a half, and their rapport and conversation was so fascinating and wonderful and warm and engaging, just as you can imagine. And I was sat way at the back. I was in the second row from the back in this huge auditorium, which I don't know how many seats it had, but I think thousands of seats. But also it was wonderful to see they'd reserved 200 or 300 seats for local school children to be able to see Michelle interviewed and talk. And so it was so wonderful knowing that, you know, groups of school children were seeing this incredible, inspirational, historic figure talk in person. That was just so wonderful. So yeah, I want to give you a little snippet of their conversation because I feel so privileged and honored to have been able to go to this that I want to share at least a little bit of it. So I'll share a bit of when Michelle is talking about meeting the Queen in an engagement with the Queen, but also the main message of her memoir, Becoming, and the inspiration behind it. So here, watch this.
I love the little bits where you talk about, well, first of all, you went to Buckingham Palace, and you thought that you lived in a big house, the White House.
You know, this is what we were trying to do in America.
But also you meet the Queen.
So up until that point, we had never driven in a car driven by anyone else. So it's like, oh, we get to ride in a car, a regular car. But then it was like, so this is what's going to happen. You're going to get out, and you're going to sit here, and they're going to sit there, and this is going to happen. And of course, your head is spinning because I'm, first of all, trying not to fall, you know, which is a major thing that I think about in public. If you want to think, am I thinking deep thoughts? Well, when I come on the stage, I'm like, don't fall, don't trip, don't trip. One of my primary goals for the 8 years was to never become a meme. So I got all this protocol buzzing in my head, and now I'm like, okay, don't trip down down the stairs, and don't touch anybody, whatever you do. And so the Queen says, just get in, sit wherever. I said, you know, so you're sort of like, she's telling you one thing and you're remembering protocol, and she says, oh, it's all rubbish, just get in. And I thought, yes.
So that all the young women here will be able to say, I like me.
Yes. It takes time. It's a process. You know, so for young folks out there, especially in your 20s and 30s, you may not like you yet because you haven't explored enough, you haven't experienced enough, you haven't sort of seen yourself push through the hard times. As you get older, you learn to appreciate the dings, and right now you're still trying to figure it out. So I don't want, you know, young women to walk away going, I don't know if I like me yet, because that is the process of becoming, you know, and it takes time and experiences. But if you keep doing the work, and the work starts in here, and it starts with erasing the doubters and filling your head up and your time up and your spirit up and your community up with people who fill you up. Because that's also a trick. You have to eliminate people who do not add value in your life.
So yeah, they had a great rapport with each other, which was sort of teasing and joking, but also incredibly respectful and touched on all the main points of the book and the message that Michelle wanted to make in the book. And so yeah, it just brought the whole memoir back to me, the experience of reading to it, of listening to it on audiobook, and I would love to listen to the book again, because it's just wonderful. And if that wasn't enough, then I also got to see Roxane Gay interviewed at the South Bank Centre. And I've shamefully never read, I've read some articles of hers before and some reviews of hers, but I've never read any of her full-length books. But yeah, it was wonderful seeing her talk about this because she's somebody who's very present on social media and online, and incredibly frank in her opinions and thoughts, and so she talked about that tricky balance. So I'll show a little snippet of that as well, so you can get an idea of that great talk as well.
In general, I think we should be allowed to write about our trauma without judgment. People are going to judge us nonetheless, and so I can't control how people are going to consume what I have to say, but I know what I want to say. I think it gets tricky when we ask people, the only thing we expect from people is the recitation of trauma. When people think that, for example, if you're a person of color, the only thing you should write about is the trauma of racism, and maybe you want to write about knitting. So that sort of forced expectation of re-traumatizing yourself for $50 for exposure, for clicks, is a huge problem. And some of the young writers are forced into that vicious cycle that it's really quite depressing. But for me, I write about what I want to write about and what I need to write about, and some of that is trauma and some of it is not. And I think that when people look at my work and all they see is the trauma, it lets me know that they're not sophisticated readers.
So that was excellent, and part of the great part of being in the audience is with listening to these great women talk is the sense of community. You could feel in the audience, you know, this huge amount of love for both Michelle Obama and Roxane Gay, and how inspired people were by them and were so eager to hear them talk. So that was really great. And also I got to go to the ceremony for the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award and see the announcement of the winner. It was held at the London Library, which is this wonderful institution in London. And so, yeah, I got to hear the announcement of the winner, the very handsome Adam Weymouth, won for his book of travel writing environmentalism called Kings of the Yukon. So here's the announcement by Andrew Holgate. And stood next to him is Camilla Shamsi, the author Camilla Shamsi of Homefire, who was a judge on this year's prize.
It is, of course, invidious to make a choice in these situations and pick out one of these over the other three very strong and notable books, but pick we had to. And I'm delighted to announce the winner of the 2018 Sunday Times Peter Fraser and Dunlop Young Writer of the Year Award in association with Warwick University is Adam Weymouth.
Thank you. I was stunned. Our baby is I mean, I have no idea where but Uli is here, and thank you so much to Uli for... Uli's a big part of the book. Uli came on the journey. Uli was a huge part of making it happen. Allowed me to write in the evenings when we were making camp. There's a huge palaver of setting up the tent and the canoeing and all the rest of it, and Uli's been a huge part of not just the journey but the support and everything after as well. So yeah, I feel absolutely honoured. I mean, I really hadn't planned a speech because I wasn't planning on being here. Have we done? I mean, thank you so much.
And of course there he was thanking his female partner and the mother of his child. And so, yeah, I was just sort of like, oh, you're very lucky, because he's a very handsome author and obviously a very caring and empathic writer. And yeah, I haven't read his memoir yet, but I'm really eager to read it. So I'll get into talking now about the books that I actually read in December. And of course, like, December is always a tricky time because I'm I'm trying to, manage seeing family and friends and, and all this sort of holiday celebration and spending a lot of quality time with my partner, which is all wonderful and I love it. But it doesn't leave all that much actual reading time. But I did read quite a few books, and I caught up with some that people had suggested I read after, I made it that call out of what I should read before the end of the year. And one of the main books people suggested I should read was Tara Westover's memoir called Educated, and I did read it, and I was so glad that I read it. And it was really interesting actually reading it in conjunction with a couple other books where it felt like there were similar themes through them. So there was also Farewell My Orange by Iwaki and Women Talking by Miriam Toews, which I thought was such an incredible novel. I counted it as one of my favorite books of the year when I made my best books of the year list. And it was so interesting reading these three different books, which take place in very different settings and about very different people, but had sort of similar themes about the institutional oppression of women. And one of the tools of this oppression is the denial of language to women, and how these different kinds of women weren't able to really engage with and participate in society because of limitations of language. And that's played out in different ways through the different books. And so in Tara Westover's, she is has a very extremist religious family, and she's not allowed to go to school. She's not even, her birth wasn't even officially registered in America until her teenage years, when she took this step and decided she wanted to go to school. And so when she first goes to college and university and is studying and is taking a class, and it's just mentioned that the Holocaust is just mentioned, and she's never heard of the Holocaust before, and so so even though she's able to speak English, her frames of reference are so far removed from the general population of just what it's expected that you'll know about. And so it was so incredible reading about her struggle, of this innate sense in herself that she wanted to learn, that she wanted to engage with society, and felt need to do this, and was brave enough to step outside the bounds of what was familiar, what was taught to her was right, to learn more about the world and engage with it. And it's heartrending, her struggle to break apart from her family and to find her own voice, to establish her own individuality. It's an incredible story, and I can see why so many people have praised this book, and everyone from Barack Obama to Michelle Obama to Bill Gates have praised this memoir as one of the best books that they read last year. And then also the novel Farewell My Orange is about two women from two different countries, two different cultures, going to Australia and learning English for the first time, taking classes in English and learning how to communicate with the society around them, but also how to find their own voice, like Tara Westover, to find out what they want in life. And through learning this new language, they learn how to articulate that. And it's incredibly moving novel. It's quite short for charting that struggle for them, and also finding this bond of friendship in their different senses of alienation in this different culture. I thought that it was a really great novel. And then, of course, Women Talking by Miriam Toews. This novel is just so incredible, which for reasons I've already talked about, but is based off from this real story of this small isolated groups of women living in this Mennonite community, which is cut off from the world, and they speak this language which is only shared now by, it's an antiquated form of language, only spoken by other Mennonites in the world. And so these women were drugged and raped over a number of many years, and so she constructs this meeting point for them, where they try to decide what they want to do with their lives, where they want to go, and the struggle of deciding how to do that when they don't speak a language, and they want their conversations to be recorded, and the only way that they can do that, since none of them can write, is by enlisting the help of a man in the community, who is sort of an outsider himself and who narrates this book. And it's interesting that this is a book all about these women's conversation, but the only way we're able to hear about it is through the perspective of this man, who is trying to be objective and just record their conversation objectively, but can't help interjecting his own points of view now and then, because he's there and he is a participant in this as well. And it's interesting how they think about their choices of what they can do to leave this community, and how the only language they have for this is to use these symbols to show that their only choices are to stay and fight the men, to stay in the community and do nothing at all, or to actually leave the community and try to establish some place for themselves in the greater world, which is a very scary thing, since they've never traveled out in the world. They don't speak the language, and and they don't have any money. They're not allowed to have any money. So to find some self-sufficiency outside of the world, it's a harrowing story, but also surprisingly humorous, the way she gets in the humor of the different personalities of these women, who slightly bicker with each other, because of course a lot of them don't agree with each other, and so yeah, it's just this wonderful human story. So yeah, I find it especially interesting thinking about all these different books in relation to each other, and how the themes of oppression of women shown throughout the books, but also even though they're quite dark, bleak stories, I thought they were incredibly optimistic in their overall messages of the resiliency of the human spirit, of how these women rose above their circumstances to find their own place in society, in the world, and establish their own individuality. So these were great books to read together and alongside each other. And then I also read this novel Leila by Prayaag Akbar. Even though Prayaag Akbar is a male author, it's about a female protagonist living in this sort of dystopian version of India, and where in Indian society the caste system has infiltrated the politics of the country so much that it's actually erected walls between the communities, physical walls between different communities and different castes in Indian society, and this is broken families apart and dependent on people's caste and their political beliefs and their political actions, how they live their lives. And it's about a family who's broken apart from each other, and it's told from the perspective of a mother who's been separated from her daughter, and her struggle to, over the course of many years, to get her daughter back. And she's had to plot for many years of a way that she can try to reconnect with her daughter, or at least find out where her daughter is, or if her daughter is still alive. And so yeah, it's a really harrowing struggle, although I found that I probably didn't understand everything about this novel that I should have, because I don't have a huge understanding of the caste system in India. I think if somebody with that knowledge would probably get a lot more out of this novel, but nevertheless, I found it a really emotional struggle, and the writing is really beautiful in this novel, and so it's a debut novel, and so it's a really striking debut. And then, of course, I also read Marlon James, massive book, and I've made a whole video talking about this, so I don't need to talk about it much anymore. But yeah, this novel is so wonderful, and it's a fantasy novel, but also it's very political. It shows, though it's about an adventure and a quest story of this group of people, this band of misfits, trying to recover this young boy who is kidnapped, and they're commissioned by a slave trader to track down this boy. But it's also about the politics of these different warring kingdoms, and how it's this real universal message about how, you know, all politics is a power struggle of people trying to shore up power for themselves and dominate over the larger society, and how he shows the subtle manipulative ways that these people in positions of power try to keep the power for themselves. I think is really striking and interesting, and is building up to a larger narrative over the course of this series of books that he's going to write. And so, yeah, but also it's just this incredible adventure story that I got so wrapped up in, and also in the way that it questions masculinity and gender relationships, and yeah, it's so wonderful. Can't stop talking about it. Yeah, so, and then also finally I read Edmund White's memoir, The Unpunished Vice, which is about his life as a reader as well as a writer. And so, you know, he's published a number of beautiful, wonderful books, novels and short stories and journalism, and yeah, and a huge biography of Jean Genet, the writer Jean Genet, and also shorter memoirs about Proust and Arthur Rimbaud. And yeah, he's an incredible intellectual and thinker, and but also this warm, empathic human being. And I can't, you know, I have to admit that I'm slightly biased talking about this book, because Edmund White is a friend of mine. I've known him for coming up to almost 20 years now. It's incredible thinking about, but I don't want to. I feel weird talking about that, because I don't want to seem like I'm like bragging that like I know the author, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm flippant, like I just met him once and I'm friends with him. But I've stayed in his apartment in New York multiple times, and when he comes to London, we've had dinner and we've corresponded a lot. And it's really interesting reading this memoir, because it feels very personal, because he's talking about his relationship with his husband, Michael Carroll, who's also a great writer, and his good friend Patrick Ryan, who's also a great writer. And these are friends of mine as well. Like, I've had long correspondences over a number of years with Michael Carroll and Patrick Ryan and Richard Canning, who he talks about as well. And so yeah, this is a very personal read for me when he's talking about his relationship with these people, and it's like, oh, I know them too. And also he's very, very good friends with Joyce Carol Oates, and as everybody knows, Joyce Carol Oates is my favorite author, and yeah, so yeah, it was great reading this on a personal level, but also just wonderful reading a writer's reflection about his life as a reader and his engagement with books and different authors, and how that's really impacted his own writing and his own thoughts. And so it's, yeah, sort of a writer's journal, but also a reader's journal, and his his thoughts on many different authors, and how you know, he's sort of humble in a way, in that he talks about how he'll say that he doesn't think he's all that great reader himself, or not a very organized reader, but then his frame of reference points are all these authors which I've never read, and because he speaks French and Italian, and he'll read things in French and Italian, and he's familiar with all these French and Italian authors which I've never heard of, and so yeah, that was so fascinating to hear him talk about, but also his very funny wry commentary on a lot of authors that you would be familiar with. And so he talks about the great English writer Penelope Fitzgerald, and talks about her very particular form of historical writing, but also his experience meeting her once, and really knowing that she had no interest in him at all, and it was quite funny and interesting. But also, you know, there are points of disagreements where he'll talk about Virginia Woolf and her novel The Waves, which is my favorite novel ever, and how he thinks the voices in it are sort of indistinguishable from each other, you know, that they're all the same voice, which they are in a way. It's this a very stylized form of narrative, which is all very much which uses a lot of imagery and this sort of poetic form of language, all very much in Virginia Woolf's form of voice. But I think if you look at these characters and what they're saying is very different from each other, so you can really distinguish these different characters from each other. So yeah, there's endless wonderful reflections in this book about the reading and writing and how we can disagree as readers and how our experiences of books are very different from each other because we all take very different things from them, and how, you know, our reading experience is based on where we are in our life, that really impacts how we read books. And yeah, so I adored this novel, this memoir. It's not a novel, it's a memoir. I adored it so much, and yeah, it was just a wonderful experience reading it. So that was my reading experiences in December. It was a great month. I hope you had a good month too. Let me know if you've read any of these books, your thoughts about them, and what you read in December, what you managed to read over the final month of the year. But I hope your year has started out well, and yeah, it's always really exciting, isn't it, picking out what book am I going to read first in the new year. So yeah, I'm going to sit down and plot that out. And unfortunately, though, I have to go back to work, and so yeah, I'm going to head to work now and yeah, try to get in some reading time during my commute. But I will speak to you again soon, and yeah, hope you're doing well. Bye, everyone.